Hey you guys, Funky Like Feathers here. Welcome to or welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about getting started in the editing process. Okay, so NaNoWriMo is going on and you write your book and you're so excited, and then you're ready to send it off to an editor after you do some rereads and where you think that it's about ready to really kind of go public. When you contact an editor, it's really important to have open conversation with them about your project and what it is that you're wanting out of this relationship, right? Because it's going to be a business relationship where they get access to your work and they're going to be sending you information on how to fix it, right? How to make it better. Now, it's also important to know the different types of editing, right? And kind of what's included in each of those. So we'll, kind of define and go more into detail into that at a different time. I have it listed in the About section on my Facebook page and stuff. Like, you can find tons of information out there about all the different types of editing. So maybe I don't need to do another video about that, but it's important to know what kind you're looking for. Now, most commonly people contact us wanting copy or line editing. And that pretty much just checks for general grammar information, making sure that the story makes sense, essentially making sure that it's in the language that you want it to be in and that the story is the story that you want it to tell. That doesn't include developmental edits where the story really needs to be built up and things like that. And it's more than just someone reading the manuscript and going, okay, here's some general feedback. Okay, so there's more intricate information there. When you send your manuscript to an editor, it's also important to know what it is you're getting into. Now, oftentimes, and what you should expect an editor to do, is to actually send you a contract about services. So this will also include the price range for what it is that they're doing. They may ask, go ahead and say, hey, here's the deposit that I'm going to require. And part of that is because when we start work on your manuscript, that is time and energy and effort that we are putting into that project. And it would be kind of crazy of us to sit down and start pouring into a project without any kind of monetary compensation for that. So a deposit, just like you would towards the design of a tattoo, right? If the artist is going to sit down and get started on that design, whether or not they actually tattoo it on you and get to finish that project, they do get paid for the initial setup of that design. Right? It's the same thing with an editor sitting down to work on your manuscript. Once we have that manuscript in hand, we need to go ahead and have a deposit so that we can go ahead and start working on it. And that also kind of covers us for a certain amount of time to work on that manuscript so that we can make the call of whether or not we need to send it back to you, where it needs to be worked on before we go deeper into it. There's a lot of things that kind of go into play there. Now, if you want to see how an editor would give you feedback about your project, you can also often ask for samples. So you can say, hey, is it possible for me to send you, a certain number of words or, a chapter, and can I get feedback on that to see what your style is like? So you can also see whether or not this editor would be a good fit if you like their feedback and how they do that or not. That's totally acceptable too. I've done several sample chapters for people. And one thing also to keep in mind, as terrifying as it can be, is that when you get edits back on your work, there's going to be a lot of stuff listed there. And let me add that there should be a lot of stuff listed for edits. There should be some kind of feedback throughout that manuscript. You shouldn't have just general feedback because that's kind of a proofread, and there should be things marked and notated along the page to showcase that editor was completely involved in what they were reading, right? So you really do want to see markations throughout the page, especially if it's your first round of edits. If you are sending your manuscript to an editor for the first time, it's going to be covered in some kind of marks. And that's what you should see, okay? If it does not have a bunch of marks on it, then that editor did you a disservice. They're lacking involvement in your work, or they lack the knowledge on how to really make this manuscript as good as it can be. I literally have had someone contact me and they sent me an entire book where it was supposed to be middle grade, and when I started going through it, it was obvious that there were some very intense rewrites needed, and I was making all sorts of notations telling them, hey, I can see what you're wanting to do here, but based upon the wording, it actually tells us something entirely different. So this needs to be reworded. We have a lot of run-on sentences, and for 1 hour worth of work, I was able to cover a few chapters of her work where really she had told me that she paid someone $20 and they edited the entire thing. There is zero way that anyone can read a full manuscript of a middle grade book that is, 30 pages. We can't read that in an hour because editing is very different than reading, right? Like reading is something, just a pastime that you can, kind of process the story that's going on. Editing is very different. It is a very intense read through of a manuscript. We're trying to make sure that tenses all agree. We're trying to make sure that the story makes sense. We're trying to make sure that the right forms of grammar are utilized, dialogue. We're checking for a lot of stuff while we're reading, and we often have to reread sections to make sure that it still all agrees. Never think that you can pay someone $20 for a manuscript and that they're going to properly edit the entire thing. That's just a huge red flag, okay? Also, if you are handing over an entire manuscript and the editor does not have some kind of contract for you, that is another big red flag. Okay, the contract is supposed to be an agreement between you and the editor. So it protects the editor, it protects you as the writer. It makes sure that everybody's on the same page, right? It makes sure that we all know what we're wanting to get out of this. We all know what we're agreeing to. So if you send someone your manuscript and you don't have some kind of contract from them to say, hey, here's what we all are agreeing to, that's scary. You just handed over your manuscript to somebody. Who's to say they're not going to run off with your manuscript and present it as their own, right? You want a contract that clearly states that they're not going to be taking ownership of it. You need to know whether or not that editor wants to be credited in the work as well. So, if you want to list who edited the work, do they want to be listed or do they not want to be listed in the book? That's something to note as well, right? What forms of communication will you be using? How much is the deposit? How much are you paying for this project? All of those little nitty-gritty pieces of information should be included in that contract. If there's anything in there that you do not agree with or don't want in that contract, it's very simple. Put it up in writing, send an email to the editor and say, hey, here's some stuff that I would like changed in that contract. Here's some things that I don't want to agree to. Let's go ahead and update that before we sign it. And that's completely acceptable. That's normal because this is a written agreement between two parties. It's supposed to protect both of y'all and it's supposed to be the agreement. So if you don't agree with something, that's completely okay. That's more than acceptable. Clearly state it in writing so that it has dates, no ifs, ands, or buts. It's there in black and white and everybody gets on the same page. Once you get that contract in place and that deposit paid, the editing process can absolutely begin and they can start delving into your project. It's also important that they do have contact information for you because then they can let you know if they have any questions along the way, right? If you do have any requirements for how often you would like updates about your project, that's something to mention as well. If that's not in the contract, ask for it. That's exactly the whole purpose of it. So make sure that you're communicating with your editors because we're really here to help you along this process. We love getting y'all's stories. As an editor, I love seeing how much you guys can accomplish on these pages. I love doing sample edits. It's actually a lot of fun. I usually cap mine at about 2,000 words. So if you want to email me a selection of your work for a sample edit, I'm totally open to that. You can email me at funkylikefeathers@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you guys and work on some of your stuff because editing is absolutely what I'm passionate about. I love to read. I read tons of different genres. I read tons of different age brackets because I like to make sure that I constantly stay exposed to the different styles of writing and all of the different ways that people utilize stories. It's actually a lot of fun to us. So I hope you guys are having a great day. Keep writing, keep those stories going. If you are doing NaNoWriMo this year, I hope you do an amazing job. I hope you win whatever goal you have set out for yourself. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.